Glenn Beck from individuals posting images on TikTok or mainstream stories in at least formerly mainstream news organizations like Newsweek, who talk about the Proud Boys. Civil war is a theme that's all around us, coming from all angles. Ideological hyperbole, I think this should be obvious, but here's some good examples of it. Alleging that the squad are not just women of color, but socialists, communists, and anti-Americans, or connecting Black Lives Matter to the communists through their logos, or alleging, and thank you to Hazel for providing this one yesterday, alleging that Donald Trump himself is in the KKK by illustrating him by putting a Klan hood over his head. Ballot risks, we see these all over. Here's the example an example that I mentioned earlier. This is, I think, from just a couple of days ago. A tweet showing a bunch of ballots that appear to be in a garbage can. We don't know if they really were in a garbage can or not. We don't know what the circumstances are, but the tweets go like wildfire. Local news picks it up, etc. There are other versions of this too. The ballot harvesting is the one you see on the right, where we're connecting it to Ilhan Omar. This one in the middle is a image that one of our ethnic media fellows who's on the call, Jangwon, shared, which is a Korean meme that I believe says, important, do not mail in vote. This is a presidential election. Drop your ballot by yourself in person. So it's fear mongering about mail-in voting. And then finally, connecting the pandemic to mail-in voting. And it's sort of a joke, but nonetheless is stoking fear. But there's also this. And so this is my last slide. I just had to show it to you. This is from this morning at 6 a.m. And I don't normally dive into things that the president shares, but this one I just wanted to end on sort of a happier or funnier note. I don't know if it's genuinely happy or it's just like, we laugh because we cry. But the president this morning at 6:07 tweeted a news article, the headline of which was, Twitter shuts down entire network to slow spread of negative Biden news. And then goes on to say, wow, this has never been done in history. This includes his really bad interview last night. Why is Twitter doing this? Bringing more attention to Sleepy Joe and Big T. So for any of you who don't know, the article that the president shared this morning was from Babylon Bee, which is a parody news website. It is essentially the same as The Onion or Saturday Night Live, right? But the president shared it as if it was legitimate. But he shared it because we are now in this incredibly painful state in our democracy, which is that we can't tell the difference between what's true and what's false, right? This is in response to Twitter did go down yesterday for like an hour or for 5 minutes, depending on who you ask. And they did take some crazy actions that not everyone agrees with, and certainly are subject to some question about how they're limiting the spread of mainstream news. So we're in this place where there aren't any rules. It's not easy to try and navigate these problems, and we just have to laugh at things like this that the president does. But given all of that, hope is not lost, guys. We all have a role to play in reducing the impact of problematic content. And I want you all to take that home, thinking about the things that I've shared with you and what you're going to hear from the other wonderful guests in just a minute. I believe that it's our shared responsibility to monitor for problematic content, to watch your own feed and find new feeds to track, and engage the other people you work with to be vigilant about problematic content. We're not talking about it today, but with our ethnic media fellows, we've developed a platform where we're all reporting content. We call it Junkopedia, and we encourage you to submit that content. And finally, think about the content that you're seeing that's problematic and create inoculating messages against it. Instead of just responding negatively to a piece of information or disputing it with it on someone on social media, or instead of writing a debunk article as your only form of saying, look at this bad misinformation that's spreading in my ethnic community, you can instead share inoculating messages, credible information that...
There are also false narratives that are co-opted and rapidly amplified in Spanish, which often goes largely unchecked on social media. There's also external foreign interference, like Russia, that has exploited hot button issues such as, immigration, but there's also a lot of domestic actors pushing out disinformation and misinformation. And finally, messaging platforms such as WhatsApp, we know is very popular among the Latino community and also other communities of color. It's central to the spread of information and disinformation, which is an issue because, these closed platforms are much harder to know what's going on. So those are just some kind of key dynamics that I think are important to understand how this all works, but I'll just move on to some of the narratives we're seeing. I think the main top line here that I really want to get out there is that bad actors are using social media for the offline goal of suppressing the vote and depressing enthusiasm among key progressive constituencies, including the Latino community. And we often see bad actors trying to inflame pre-existing tensions within and between communities. For example, Jacquelyn mentioned Black Lives Matter. We saw a lot of bad actors looking for opportunities to create divisions among communities of color. So we especially saw this from far-right actors, including far-right Latinx actors who, try to attempt to position the Latino and Black communities against each other. But we also see them, trying to divide within the Latino community. So I'm going to talk about some of the key narratives that are prevalent in Latinx spaces, such as protest violence and racial tension, this idea of this perceived threat of socialism, and vote by mail attacks. But really quickly, before I go into the narratives, I do want to mention that we're seeing some far-right Latinx accounts coordinating their efforts, which is a common tactic by bad actors, where they often share the same story or meme with the same post at the same time across their Facebook pages, which allows them to reach more feeds and people. And these posts here are promoting stories of alleged voter fraud and trying to discredit vote by mail efforts, which I'll discuss later. But this coordinated messaging around mail-in voting fraud is already being directed to the Hispanic community. And while there's legitimate confusion, there's a clear intention to create distrust of both political parties and of the system in general in order to depress voter turnout. Jacquelyn talked a little bit about Black Lives Matter. I want to talk to you all about how it was played out in Latinx spaces specifically. And I think one big thing is that, it largely reflects the broader far-right social media conversation, where they try to paint Black Lives Matter and protesters as violent, and they're trying to undermine the movement. So we see bad actors essentially, amplify cherry-picked examples or individual instances of violence or threats to support these claims, which again is a common tactic by bad actors, where they cherry-pick specific examples to further their narrative or legitimize their narrative. But as you can see from these screenshots, far-right Latinx users claim that Black Lives Matter is destroying cities and buildings, attacking or harassing people. And these screenshots are obviously just some examples of the broader narrative about Black Lives Matter and violence, but the narrative is being promoted constantly in many of the posts that are getting thousands of shares. And then I want to go a little bit more into detail about the narratives around violence and crime. So we're seeing bad actors trying to create racial tension and division among these communities of color, and we continue to see this narrative being pushed in Latinx spaces around the protest violence. So we not only see bad actors attack Black Lives Matter more broadly, but we often see them, tap into racist tropes or white supremacist narratives. So you see from these screenshots here, many, these are all Latinx accounts, some of them Spanish accounts, where they, activated around the murder of a young white kid and specifically promote, race blindness by pointing out that a Black man was a suspect, as you can see from the second and third post. But they use this story to, criticize Black Lives Matter in the media for essentially not protesting the death of the child and for staying silent, which is something that we've seen throughout this year, especially in Latinx spaces. We saw it around the death of Vanessa Guillen, where users were criticizing Black Lives Matter for staying silent and would claim that they didn't care about Latinos or they don't care about anybody outside of the Black community. And this is just another example. The post on the right, it's a narrative that Black Lives Matter is silent on Black crime, and then they use that to claim that the real issue is Black on Black crime over police brutality and systemic racism. And then I guess going back really quick to the first post, we continue to see some.
I think someone asked earlier a little bit about QAnon. Why is QAnon so popular? QAnon's so popular because everybody can get behind the idea of no one wants to abuse children and them being so vulnerable. Like, who cannot get behind that?
Mail-in voting. For instance, one meme claimed there is nothing to prevent that same voter after they already cast a mail before election day and also going to voting location on election day. So there is a possibility of double voting in mail-in ballot system in New Jersey, but that's not true. New Jersey government adopted a couple of procedure to prevent any double voting. So this is misinformation, but this bad user tried fueling doubt on the mail-in voting system. Yes.
You are in Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, John Wong. Vijaya, what's going on in the Indian American community? Can you unmute Vijaya, please? Vidya Pradhan.
Thank you. It's interesting. What I've noticed in the Indian American community is that often the politics of what's happening in the US are linked back to the politics of what's happening in India. For many, it seems to be very resonant. And one of the potent arguments that has legs is that the Democrats are not supportive of the current administration, the Modi government in India, and therefore that's used in many ways. That's used as Joe Biden does not support what Modi did in Kashmir. Joe Biden supports Pakistan. Joe Biden supports China. So all the hot button issues of the Indian American community are used, of the Indian community are used as proxies for the Indian American community, and a lot of misinformation and hyperbole is used to turn what is a traditionally democratic supporting community in the US away from that by invoking issues that are relevant in India. So that's how
Hazel, also one of our fellows. Can you unmute Hazel? Hit me, please. Let's see. Can you unmute Hazel?
Sorry.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Everything that I was going to say has already been mentioned. So I'll start like this because I think it's important for all the journalists and specifically editors who are listening. I have on my desk an article from one of my interns. I have 5 interns, and one of the articles is headlined "Black Lives Matter Losing Support in Black and White Communities." Now, I had not heard yet about what Michelle Bachmann had said about Black Lives Matter when this article came to my desk. But I was looking at it and I was like, well, it's got to be legit because he's quoting Pew Research, etc. So it looks perfectly legitimate. But this is what they want. The people who desire disinformation and misinformation to get out there into regular news outlets across the country, they want it to look legitimate. And so after I heard about Michelle Bachmann, because I had set the story aside, I was like, something is wrong with this picture. Then I saw all of the incendiary language that's used, the Black Marxists, everybody, they want everybody to think that Joe Biden, the president, Joe Biden, I'm trying to get through this fast. Joe Biden is going to bring communism into this country, etc. And so what that does is it trickles into regular news reports unwittingly. We don't know necessarily why it is that the support for Black Lives Matter is going down, but it's because of language like this that's getting out there, and it's making it look like Black people are